Today, have something a little bit different than we usually do. I think maybe we're doing a little more now, but we're going to actually be having a discussion instead of a sermon today about fatherhood. As was already said earlier today, we do focus a lot on Mother's Day, and rightfully so. I think every father is like, Amen. We celebrate our mothers. At the same time, for some reason, we do not talk a lot about fatherhood, especially like this. We talk about it between ourselves. Fathers speak with other fathers. Men, we kind of share these things. But when it comes to church, there's not as much conversation. And so today we just wanted to talk about fatherhood in all its aspects. And I'm going to say right away, we want to be open. We want to be honest with everybody. There are fathers that are in this room. And at the same time, there are sons that are here that even if you're not a father, some of you guys are young and you're like, I don't have kids. The reality is that I think every person who becomes a father, every man who became a father, you realize, man, there's so many things that you pick up and so many things that influence your fatherhood even before you became a father. So every son or most sons will eventually become a father. So to discuss all this, I just want to invite my brothers up here. If you guys can help me welcome Pastor Vlad, and Pastor Igor. And we will talk a little bit about fathers and fatherhood and be as open and as honest as we can. The idea here is to be practical, to be practical with our examples, with our lives, and at the same time to talk a little bit from a biblical sense as well, not just share stories, but share about fatherhood from the biblical perspective and the things that we see in today's day and age. Now, I just have a little softball question for you guys, but I think it's a pretty important question, at least for me. Just to kind of break the ice here, could you guys share something memorable, something from your life that you remember about your dad? And I want to warn everybody, the way we're talking, it sounds like it's a memorial service about our fathers and remembering. We're just talking about remembering from our childhood. That's the memorial service to our childhood. But something that maybe stands out to you about your dad, or a moment that you shared, or something like that. Would you guys be able to share?
Happy Father's Day to all the fathers out there. One of my first memories that I remember about my dad, we were still living in Ukraine. I was maybe 4 or 5 years old, and I wanted a little radio, a little radio set made from Play-Doh. And I would ask him about it. Can you make me one? He's like, yeah, I will. And then I remember one time he came home from lunch, and me and my mom went outside to meet him, and he says, Igor, I got something for you. I'm like, what? And he pulls out this little radio that he made. He carved out he made it to resemble just like the real thing. He carved out all the little things on it, and he gave it to me. And I remember that I was like, wow, look at this little radio that I wanted. So just one of my very, first memories of my dad, so.
Since we take insurance, I remember when he spanked me. Most memorable.
We all remember.
No CPA in here, no CPS, Child Protective Services in here. I honestly, probably the most what I remember, here you go, there's a picture of my dad.
Which
there.
one are you?
I am that guy, if you're looking on the right, if you're looking at the picture on the right, standing by my older sister, with that little funny looking pants. I think my most memorable moment of my dad, personal ones when I was already older, but the ones that I remember him is always working in church, counseling people. That's what I remember. But my personal moment, I think it was at age of 16, 17, when he came to me and he actually spoke to me that he loves me. It was first time, genuine time when he actually looked at me and he said, I love you. And that stuck for the rest of my life with me. Even I was already at the age of, I think, 17.
Just two quick things for me. So my dad he enjoyed fishing. Not so much now, but just growing up when we immigrated to the U.S., yeah, pretty bad there. Well, he enjoyed fishing, and when you're a kid, you don't wake up 5 a.m. to go to school. I mean, every time was like a dread waking up to go to school. But for my dad, when he would wake me up, I knew it was difficulty to fall asleep because you're so worked up. You're going fishing early the next morning and with dad, and I had a hard time falling asleep, but when he would wake me up at 5, it was like just dark, and we had to get all the fish and get the worms and the bait, and he would wake me up. To me, it was like God waking me up and saying, "Let's go fishing, son." It was just I flew out of bed just like that, It was the most amazing time, and just dad waking me up going fishing. And then when I was, I think, high school, he bought a car once, and he went to my uncle to pick it up. And so we drove the car to his place in Antelope, and then we had to drive it back to Citrus Heights. So we sit down in the car, and I'm thinking like Isaac and Abraham, we know where's the offering, and I'm thinking where's the driver to come back? Who's driving the second car back? I had no driver's license. It was like your dream, to just drive in the apartment block, with no one watching. And I'm like, no, that's not gonna happen. Like, yeah, right. Anyway, he throws me the keys to our car, and he says, you're driving it home. Okay, nobody call the cops right now, okay? He broke the law, and I drove the Nissan Sentra station wagon 1987 with him in the back through Greenback from like Elkhorn. I was owning the world. We were breaking rules, and I'm like, no way. Did my dad to me, he just rose like he was the man. He was the authority. He broke the rule, but I couldn't believe that he actually pulled that off for me.
You guys keep saying something like, "Oh, I hope nobody calls." You guys are too big to take away. It's okay. You can share your stories. Nobody's gonna take you away.
That was that.
I'll share kind of mine quickly as well. I've shared this probably a few times, but it has to do with when I was a kid and the first time I seriously defied my dad. I went to a movie theater back in the day when we weren't supposed to go, and I went with a friend that was older, and I lied to my parents. I called them. I felt guilty, so I felt like I needed to call them. So I called them from a store, and they didn't answer, so I left a voicemail, and I said, hey, I'm at a store, even though I was at a theater. And halfway through the movie, my conscience was killing me. I called again, and I'm like, hey, I'm just checking in. Want to tell you everything's okay. And they're like, where are you? And I just was like, at the movies. Couldn't help it. I had to admit it. So my dad was like, all right, you got to get home right this second. And so I had to pull my friend out of the movie, and he led me. We were on bikes. We went down also Elkhorn all the way to Sprigg over there by Walerga. And the whole way there, all I was thinking about was, man, which belt will he use? And how many times, because this is the worst that it's ever been. But I came home, and my dad, I was just afraid because this was serious. And he pulled me into the room, and not pulled me, told me to come into the room. And I sat down, and instead of spanking me, he actually sat down, and he taught me the lesson about trust. And he said, we trust you. That's why we let you do whatever you want with your friends. But this is how you destroy trust. And it's almost impossible to build it back. That moment, that lesson was better than any spanking, than anything in that moment. I'm not saying spanking was bad. It helped me too. That moment was big. So that's kind of something that's memorable from my story. But we're talking about fatherhood today. And in general, just in like a few words, what would you say, obviously as fathers, fathers have a great influence on their kids, and we're going to break that apart a little more, but what is a way that how your father has influenced you that you can see today? Not so much a moment, but what in you do you see your father has influenced you with?
Just, my dad was always a quiet man. He was not your preacher and your kind of, great influencer. He was not a public figure. He was always quiet, but he had this quiet strength about him. My mom went through 2 heart surgeries, and one was in Moscow before I was born, which was like 50-50. You could die, because back then, Soviet Union, heart surgery, that meant 50% chance of death. She had 2 of those, one here. But just growing up, I think the influence of my dad, it's not so much the direct as in I got to observe his life and the quiet strength that he had. And the one thing that stands out through my entire life, and I still see it to this day, is the way he loved my mom. It's more love than any woman could ask. It's the tall order for me, and I'm not even there to meet that. The way he loved her, people always, his family and they always teased him about it, Vita, Natalka, and kind of throwing in the Ukrainian there. But he loved her, it's small things, just sitting down for dinner or for lunch. He would never start eating, and he would invite my mom to the table so he can eat together with her, so we can finally sit down and eat. Our mom's always doing the food and trying to set the table and things, so she's busy, and everybody starts eating. He would always like wait and kind of be intentional, Mom, sit down, drop it all. And he would just wait and wait, and just things like that. The way he loved her, and how much. And I think the physical conditions of my mom, I think it just really broke his heart, and his whole life he just poured himself out in a very quiet way, in a very quiet way, but in a very strong way. So for me to grow up and to see that, I've never seen an argument in our home. I can say that with assurance. They had, disagreements, but people would say, from the side, you call that an argument? That's not even an argument. I've never seen that, and I know that they did not close the doors and take it out amongst themselves, because the thing is, don't do it in front of your kids. I know that it just never happened. The way he was, so soft. It's not that he ignored arguments or disagreements. It's just that he just loved her so much, and he found ways to work things out that way, and I got to witness that. To me, that's the greatest influence on my life.
I think my dad influenced me. First of all, it's an interesting thing. You might be looking at us like, you guys are too young to teach us to be dads. We're not trying to teach today, we're preparing today. We're actually talking about our dads influencing us. We'll talk about some struggles as parents, but we actually learned a lot from our parents, and that's what we're sharing. We're hoping it's something that's gonna bless you today. My father, he was not really a personal man. I don't know what it is with Slavic culture, but our fathers, they were not to a point like, Susi Musi, I love you, and all that stuff that we do to our kids, and tell them you're beautiful, you're going to succeed, and all that empowering stuff. But he showed me two things in his life. One was stability, is where he was just a hard-working man. He had 9 children in Ukraine. One more child was born here. And he just worked hard. I mean, he would work full-time, and ministry. The way he just loved to do ministry, I think that's where I picked up the work habits. He would be like staying on Sunday in church, just counseling people all the time, meeting, and he would tirelessly just work hard. And that's, I think, one thing from observing him, what I got from him the most. And I know one thing, when he knows that God tells him something and he knows it's God, he won't listen to anything. But if it's God, he's going to go to whatever measure it is to make it happen.
Before I share two things, Ed, I gotta ask, was it at least a good movie that you went to see?
It's embarrassing, but it was the first time Big Mama's House came out.
Well,
Wasn't very good.
for you to decide. Two things.
I didn't finish it, obviously.
Two things to share about my dad. One thing my father, which I strive to be, is the way you see him inside the home, within the family, the way he talks to my mom, his wife, the way he talks to us kids, just the way he lives. And when I would see him interact with people outside of the home, it was pretty much the same individual. There was no, this is him behind closed doors, and this is him people time. So one of the things that influenced me and still does, and I strive to have that in my life, is the way I am behind closed doors is the way I would want to be in front of people. So that was one of the things. Second thing, which had a huge influence in me, in ministry. I remember I was about maybe 12 years old or so, and my dad at that time, a season in his life, he was going on missions in Ukraine. And I remember this one time, this was mid-90s. Not a lot of money, not a lot of, starting out in America. And he was working a job, my mom was working a job, not a lot of finances to go around. And I remember he wanted to do an evangelism crusade in Ukraine. And it so happened that he took money off of a credit card to make that happen, to pay for tickets, to pay for everything, to fly there, to make that happen. And I remember this one time, they were just talking with my mom. I was small, I was like 12 years old, and they were talking, and they were saying, how are we gonna manage? You're going to Ukraine for a month. Credit card, it was like $11,000, opening everything up here to you guys. And they were just talking, how are we gonna do this? How are we gonna pay this off? You're gonna be gone. And I remember my dad was just listening, and when my mom stopped talking, he just looked at her and said, don't worry, God will provide. And the way he just said it, it wasn't just, oh, I hope he provides. Just, and I remember looking, I was a child. I wasn't even in the conversation. I was just observing. And I thought, and that was so ingrained within me. And he did. He went to the mission field. God, used them to preach the gospel. And God did provide. But that incident right there, I even told him years later, I'm like, you don't even know what kind of impact that had on me. That you trusted God so much. You didn't place it upon logic. You didn't just use your mind. So that was one of the things which influenced me a lot.
When we're talking about fathers and mothers, obviously a mother influences her child differently, right? There's the whole nurture aspect and all that we're not going to get into right now. There's a scripture that we all know. It says that start children off on the way they should go, and even when they're old, they will not turn from it, right? From Proverbs. The concept being that, the way what you put into your child's life, the way you influence them, that's going to play out over the course of the life. And I don't think that this is just talking about good things. Obviously, it's talking about good things, bad things, everything in general. What you see, you're going to be living it out or struggling with it or being blessed by it all of your life. If a mother has a specific type of way that she influences a child and what she, I would say, develops within a child, right? What are the ways that a father develops the child? In which way, what does his influence practically look like? In which ways does he influence, his son or his daughter?
It's an interesting thing. I think it's a God-given authority to a father. It's a totally different influence. The authority when the child looks at a man in his life, he looks up like this, and when that man says something about him, it just engraves and stays there. It's negative or positive. I'll share one story that touched me very deeply. It's a negative story, but it teaches a lesson of authority of a man. He was already probably in his 80s or 90s, getting ready to already go to other side. And he repented and he wrote a letter to his daughter. He hasn't seen her for 20 years. And he said, daughter, I want to restore my relationship with you. I want to say sorry to you. Would you meet me? He didn't see her for 20 years. And she's like, well, I'll meet you, but not at the house. I'll meet you in the restaurant. So he bought a ticket right away. He flew in. She met him. He didn't know how she looks. Then he had to figure out that obviously he left the house when she was a young girl, 13, 14. And when she came, so basically he divorced her mom. The family was broken. And when she came as a girl and she asked, Dad, I have one question for you. Was I that ugly that you left mom? It's a grown woman that's already 20 years later, that she's taught for all of her life that her dad divorced her mom because she was ugly, because something he said somewhere where it just stayed in her mind, and that was a healing process. And we said, no, that's not what it is. It was just me. It was my problem. And she's like, well, I have a gift for you. She invited him over the house, and for the first time, he got to meet his grandchildren that he haven't seen and he didn't even know they exist. That's the authority, just that moment, the fathers, where they can look at a child and say, hey, you're smart, you're going to do this, got it. Or it's the opposite. In anger, you say something, and it just stays there.
They say that a lot of times that a father is the one who can create courage in a child or
Yes.
boldness, right? Because of that. If you say something to your child or your son, for example, father to a son, you're capable, like you just mentioned, it means something. There's something, and it's not to put mothers down, but when a father says that and he looks in his child's eyes, there's something there that is ingrained, and vice versa. What are some other things?
I think what you said, Vlad, and what we're talking about, this is big. I think the mom probably connects more emotionally, with just kind of being home and kind of establishing the home, and there's that, she understands more, and she's kind of more soulful and emotional and connects with kids, and so it's an instant kind of connection. Plus, she gave them birth. There's a supernatural, there's a miracle why the connection is so easy. For dad, I think it's that they provide that structural foundation, that solid base in what they say, in reaffirming their kids. And I see that in my kids, and my wife reminds me time and time again. She's like, I see how they listen to me, and I see their faces and how they're hearing when you begin to talk. It's a completely different approach, the attention span. And it's not because I'm saying something to them that's like, wow. It's just I'm the father, I'm the figure, I'm the authority, and it's like all eyes and dad, okay, I have to listen to this. And so when you have serious but open conversations, I think it goes deep in laying the foundation and just solidifying them as a strong man and woman.
Kids, they watch very closely your relationship, how you live. And they, based on that, develop their psychology. And they see if the husband is the authority in the family, they respect it. If the husband is not an authority in the family, they'll disrespect, and they'll think this is how it should be. Not too long ago, I was with a permission recording a phone conversation for our ministry. And in my recordings on my wife, I went through, and there's a recording of her 4-minute questionnaire to my son. He's sitting right here. His name is Leon. He's 6 years old, and he already has a girlfriend in school. They have all the letters and stuff. And she was asking him a bunch of questions. What are you guys planning with the wedding? And how's it going to be? Who'll be doing the
She's
cooking?
okay with it, it sounds like.
Well, she'd be asking all these questions as like, hey, who's going to be taking care of the laundry? Who's going to be doing to work? And everything he said 100% resembled my relation with my wife. So basically, the way he sees me acting, whatever I do, he just mirrored it. And he basically already started building his psychology, how he's going to plan out, how he's going to play a role as a father, as a husband in his family. And who's going to take care of the children? She will.
Oh, lad, you got to prepare a few goats for the dairy for the young woman and her family. Just kidding. To touch, just add to what the brothers already said. I remember when we just had 2 kids, and when they were a lot smaller, when they were just running around playing with their toys. I was just, like all of our parents, we pray about our kids, and I remember the Lord just started speaking with my heart. It wasn't a revelation I got, just speaking to my heart. And one of the things that was open to me, the Lord spoke, is how you, right now, when they're small, as they're growing, how you act towards their mom, how you act towards church, towards me, God was saying, and towards all aspects of life. Either you're building them up, or you as a father are going to be such a stumbling block that it's going to take me years to undo everything you've done. If you've taught them wrong, if you've showed them how to act towards people, towards church, towards God. So I think as what a father does when they're small, when we think they don't notice, they notice how we act. I think that this is how I believe it either helps the Lord, so the Lord could start using them at an earlier age, or, as in many cases we see that it takes, not because God can, it's just because a person is so broken, that it takes years for the person to be restored from the stumbling blocks that were in the family from the father.
Everything that we're talking about, obviously, one way or another, no matter what aspect you touch on in fatherhood or an influence of a child, one way or another, you see that the principles of the father are the thing that influences a kid, right? If a father is principled, or in the Bible it says that, the righteous man walks in his integrity, his children are blessed after him. That's a principle, right? If he's a person that carries integrity, his children will benefit from that. They will inherit some sort of influence to be, a person of integrity. At the same exact time, as we're talking about all of these, positive aspects of what we just said, I kind of want to be open and honest and ask you this. We don't have much time, and I want to, before I say this, I want to make it very clear for every person here. Obviously, the negative sides have to be discussed at least a little bit. And the reality is that every generation has been influenced, right? We're talking about fathers and sons. You can trace that father-son relationship forever. And so the concept being that a father influences his sons or his daughters, right? And they influence further on. And every generation has their pluses and their minuses. I want to talk a little bit about some of the things that a lot of people hear, right? We're all kind of, in the same area culturally. We're all kind of in the same area in terms of immigration and all that. What are some of the things that maybe even based on what we see in our lives, you can see some of the challenges that, say, our parents faced, our fathers faced when they came here? What are some of those things that maybe they didn't, I don't want to say didn't understand, or maybe something that they didn't realize would influence us negatively? What are some of those things that you would share?
Personally, I think it's a negative thing, but it happened culturally. It's not just my dad to blame. It's something that happened within the Slavic culture. I think there was no understanding of spending a time on the personal level where you kind of just level with the kid and just go out, play some sports. It was kind of not a holy thing. It's to teach Bible, to learn scripture, memorize, to go work. It was part of it, but there was no that establishment like, hey, this is you, this is me, let's go out. And I've seen that in a lot of families when they started talking to my age kids. They're like, yeah, I never had that with my dad. Yeah, but I wanted to, but it was just in the culture, it was not really a holy thing to do. So for me, it was a personal struggle, kind of to accept it through time. And as a father, this is my struggle today. And my biggest struggle today as a father to my children, I have a 10-year-old daughter and I have a 6-year-old son, is not just to spend time with them. To spend time with them, that means don't go to work, don't go to gym, come home and you're home. You're with the family. And oh, here you go, I'm home, I'm here, kids. But to spend time in their interests.
Spend quality time.
Quality time is actually level with them and play Legos or play Monopoly and actually be involved in the process. For me, it is the biggest struggle. Because why? Because I have to sacrifice my own entertainment life, my own desires, my own gym time, my own friends time, my own time with wife to spend with them. And for just check mark, yeah, I'm home, I'm here, I love you guys, here's a hug, here's good words, I love you and respect you. So I'm really working hard on myself. I'm really trying to find a way, not just to say good words, to show them love, but to actually learn to give them quality time, what they will remember when they grow up.
And this is, you brought up on the other side of this. That's kind of the whole point of even discussing these negative things, because I think there's a lot of things that maybe we, right, on whatever our ages are, we deal with. They're things that we struggle with because all of us struggle with something, and we don't even realize that in some ways it's passed down to us. It's something that we inherit, and it's something that for us to learn from, the same way that our kids are going to look back at us and they're going to see plenty of things that's like, man, I wish my dad did this with me, or I wish my dad was more like this. And they're going to have certain things to be able to point out also in us. I mean, that's going to go on like that forever. We're all fallen people. What are some of the things that you see that maybe, along the lines of what we're talking about?
Well, most of us, our parents are from the former Soviet Union. That meant that life was really tough. It was survival mode. If you're a believer, a Christian, you're always on the defensive. You always had to protect your kids. You're always harassed. You were called names, persecuted. So you kind of develop that rigid, you had to always be strong. And I think the culture in general, men, they were strong. You never showed that you're weak. If you look at the president right now of Russia, he's always strong. There's the manliness, the strength. And I think it comes a time when you see where it's too much, where in reality, all of us, we have a weakness. We have a time when we need to go in, lock ourselves, and just cry it out. All the men here, they want that. But in that culture, in that difficult, you have to be strong. You have to maintain. And so when little, Vlad is growing up or others, that softness, that vulnerability, that when the kid knows, hey, my dad he's not all that strong. He is, but he's actually human. That he needs strength himself. He's not always strong 100%. When they grow up, they begin to understand that. If they don't, if the tendency is that dad is always strong, dad never makes mistakes, dad does not apologize or says I'm sorry, and that's very hard to do in our culture, to say I'm sorry, because dad is always right. It's honor, it's respect to authority, and we're not questioning that, because we get to live it out right now. This is our life, so who's to say how we're going to do it? But there's that strength, and I think it lacked the softness and the vulnerability of the father as a culture.
And if you look at it, even this aspect right here, you see it in our, once again, it's probably right along with it, that closedness. Not just strength, but even the concept to be closed. Image, right? To project an image of strength, to project an image of, hey, my family's perfect, to project an image of, we got everything under control, we don't have struggles, or my kid's not on drugs, and things like that. That kind of a thing is another thing that you see, I think, a lot of people struggling with. And I can see it. Why? Because even working with young people, how hard it is for certain people to open up about the deepest things of their heart. And by opening up is the only way that they're going to find freedom. But how hard it is because it's kind of been ingrained. Are there any other things that you guys would like to add?
Yeah, so what Pastor Vlad said, that because our parents did come from a close society, from from the former USSR. I remember when I was about 14 years old, my dad took me out once. We went to Reno, I guess to spend time to talk to each other. And what I found was, I remember I was 14. It was a little bit awkward. The reason being is because what we all touched on a bit, that the Slavic culture didn't really
did your
have
dad
that.
take you to like give you the talk?
I think so.
It didn't work out.
No, so we went there, we walked around, and I could sense in him that he wants to talk to me. He was putting his best effort, but it was just not happening. And I don't blame him for it, because I think he didn't know how to do that. And we came back, and all of that. And one of the problems that we see is because when we as parents think of us 20 years down the road, when our kids are grown, we have an image of how our family is going to look, or how we want it to look. But the problem happens when the kids start growing up. The image that we had, or we thought it was going to be, it shatters. Because if you want the image when your kids are 25 to have a close relationship, to be able to talk to them, that starts when they're 5, running around with toys. What Pastor Vlad was saying, spending quality time, investing in their interests. And I think one of the things that I struggle with, and I ask God for help, is I want to invest time in my kids. I want to be able to learn how to say sorry. I want to learn how to be able to apologize, because I don't think that's, when you apologize to your children, or when you say, as a dad, I blew it. I failed here. It was a sin before God. It was a sin before you. What helps them see is, hey, what I see in the Bible, what I hear in Sunday school, that's in my dad. So I think, one of the things is just the previous Slavic generation. They wanted to, but I think they just couldn't open up, because, like Vlad was saying, the image of a strong man. And I think that's why families now with grown kids are not connected.
We don't have too much time, but I do want to take actually a little more time than we even allotted, because I think we're getting to kind of the key areas. We talked a little bit about some of the things that we all inherited and that we are learning to deal with and all that stuff. At the same time, there are certain things here, being a father here in the U.S., that you face every single day. There's certain challenges that are unique to this culture. At the same time, on top of the stuff that you inherited and all that, what are some of the things that you kind of see, we as fathers here in the U.S., what are some of these unique challenges to this place that we face?
I think right now, one of the biggest challenges is a lot of kids, they're growing up with physical fathers as orphans, literally, because the world, we're like so busy, we're so consumed with our things, and many times I sit down to talk with kids who are getting baptized, and spending 30 minutes with a kid, you can tell if he was nurtured, he was taken care of by a father, and simply the other kid was just ignored. And the truth is, he has money, this kid or her, the car, because parents work, they're doctors or nurses, whatever, but the kid grew up with an absent father or a mother. They are literally growing up by themselves, and the culture is actually the one who's developing who they are, media, Hollywood, and all this. So the challenges as parents we are facing, and the truth is that I see that a lot of parents, us, young parents, we don't understand that the window that we have is very small and it closes fast. And we think that this window is going to be much longer. But the truth is, the more I meet with young people, the more I see this window starts closing at very young age, 12, 13, 14, somebody younger, somebody a little bit older, depends on the character. But once this window closes, you as a parent, you cry and you wish that kid would talk to you. When right now, the kid wishes you get off that phone in the car and you talk to him. The kid wishes to pour out his heart or whatever the boy said or the girl, and you're so busy to listen to them. And then you wish for the rest of your life, this kid would have talked to you. So this is a big problem that happening in the families because we're so busy and we're thinking we have a whole life when the window is like this small. Use the opportunity. And this is something that I preach to myself all the time. I want to use the opportunity that's given, especially when they're very young.
Anything to add to that? What are some of the things that we're dealing with today, that you maybe personally are dealing with today as a father?
I mean, I don't have to go far to bring an example. It happened today. I came to a 10:30 service with the family, and I stayed for 12:30. Just had some other plans later after church. So we all came as a family, and we're sitting there in that section, and our rule is no phones in church. No matter how old you are, the phones are off. We're not playing games, and we do minimal, art, little crafts and things. Sophia is 4 years old, and she pushed the limit. Last time this happened was probably a year and a half ago, and today it happened on Father's Day. I got a little present or a test. She pushed the limit with my wife. I'm worshiping, Jesus, you're good. And then I'm seeing that, and so I pick her up. She throws a fit. The whole church is looking. Pastor Vlad is walking out with his daughter, and she's just throwing a fit.
Must be a bad father.
And everybody's watching this pastor go out, and so I go around, go in the green room. We go into the electrical room where it's quiet. I sit her down, and she's not having any of it. She's just lost control. And I try to talk to her, and I begin to give her, quote unquote, a lecture of how she needs to behave, or there will be consequences. She's kind of out, and then she begins to listen. But somewhere in that conversation, I felt like later, God reminded me during our worship, like I crossed the line, where I lost peace. I wasn't doing it with love. I wasn't trying to win her over. I was kind of trying to tell her how things are going to be, versus trying to build a bridge. Like, I'm building a bridge to you. Come on, I want to win you over. I kind of crossed that line, and I was standing here worshiping today and repenting at our worship service because of God just said, so I'm thinking I should probably go home and apologize before her today. I don't have to go far. I go to the cross every night and I ask for forgiveness, just like everybody else does. And it's life.
Yeah, we're about to finish, but I just want to say this. Another big problem that I see today, and this is something I pray about, this is something that I hope is going to happen in our families, is that we learn to become spiritual fathers and mothers to children who grow up in broken families. For me, it's such a struggle. Like, I see a lot of families, even in our church, that are broken. If father could be a drug addict or an absentee father, or he doesn't even care about children, and we know these families. And the truth is, we care about our kids. We make sure they have a nice home, nice bed, everything taken care of, therapeutic, and all this stuff. You want their back to be straight and healthy, best Legos and stuff. But Jesus Christ called us to love other children as much as we love our own. And this is something I'm developing in myself, and this is something I'm praying about, and this is something I hope that we as families, because we always say church, we mean pastoral care department, some kind of department, somebody will do it. But the truth is, it's us. If we're not going to take this challenge, we're not going to take this vulnerable children who are literally struggling, who are abused in their families, and not going to become their spiritual fathers and show them just attention and love, nobody else will. And they might actually look at God the way they are raised by their absentee or abusers.
See, this is the kind of the sensitive subject. Obviously working in teen ministry also for many years. When we did a subject like honor your parents, we taught our kids in junior or in teen ministry, honor your parents, right? A biblical rule and guideline. And I had many kids afterwards come up to me, and I'm saying, like, a good amount of kids, and like, how am I supposed to honor my parents? Or how am I supposed to honor my dad when he's not here? How am I supposed? In some ways, obviously, that's another, I think, struggle today, is that more and more we see folks, obviously, that make up the church who come from broken homes. And thank God they're here in the church, that we're together, one family. That being said, there are probably people in this room right now where, for us, we're talking about Father's Day and we're celebrating and we got everything up here. For them, this is not exactly a celebration. They're sitting here and maybe in some ways in their heart, it's kind of like, well, that's great for you guys. That's awesome. Good, have fun. What would you say to people like that? Because they were obviously negatively influenced as well. We're talking about people who've been abandoned, people who were abused, or who saw something terrible from their fathers specifically, right? What would you say to somebody like that in two-part question? What would you say to somebody like that, number one? Number two, what would you say to them specifically in the negative things that they've inherited? How can they overcome those things?
Two things I would suggest. If you're a child, you're living right now in an abusive family where your dad abuses you, or you came or grew up without a dad, my number one thing that what you could do, and this is the best, is to understand you have a Father in heaven, and you just build your relationship with Him. That's one, and that's the only one. And the truth is, we are who are not born again and are not Christian, not in the will of God. We are also spiritual orphans. We are struggling, and we're looking for that desire and approval from our Father in heaven. Second thing, I would practically recommend, find a man who you respect. Literally. Let it be your uncle. Let it be somebody in the church, or somebody who you have deep respect, your relative. And come up to him, open up that you, as a person, as a child, never had a dad. Or you had a dad that you never loved you, never fulfilled any of your needs, and you feel empty and you just want to talk to somebody. Find that person and just open up to whatever you're going through. You'll be amazed. If that person happens to be good man, he will influence you, and he will become that spiritual father, and he will replace something in you. Here's an interesting statistic. This is kind of the last thing that I'll say, and we're going to be wrapping up. Psychologists, they tried to figure out, when they took, they studied 6,400 boys who grew up without a dad, and they followed them from age 14. They took boys from 14 to 22, followed them all the way to age 30. And they did statistics, and these kids, they were twice as much sexual abusers, these boys. They were 2.5 more times were more in prisons than boys who grew up with fathers. And the psychologists, they tried to figure out, like, what can we do? We see the problem when there's no father in life. And then the question is, what if there's no father in my life right now? What I can do? And they started researching, and they found that if there's another man, not necessarily a stepdad, because many times it's the opposite, but it's another man who the mom trusts and allows him to come into the child's life and become the role model. And that actually helps the child to actually develop a different perspective, that could be a different man. Because the truth is, when girl grows up, a young girl in a family where the father is abuser or absent, this is her whole world, her idea of life. This is how she sees, and this is her psychology. Somebody else needs to come in and say, hey, it's different. And the truth is, when she's growing up without a father, or with a father who's absent, she needs that role model to show your Father in heaven is different. And when she can see that, she'll come to the point when she'll be born again, she'll experience the Father in heaven, and that's the true sonship. That's the true experience that we all earn for and need.
To add to what Vlad said, I think one of the things when a teenager or child is growing up in a family or in a home where not everything is together, where it's broken, and they look at what Ed said, how can I honor my parents? They don't say this maybe out loud, but they're thinking, what are you talking about? And they're afraid to come to God with it. Because how are they going to tell God, I don't want to honor him? What did he do so I should honor him? They think they're going to be stricken down by God. But I think, just from some personal even experiences, when I was a lot smaller, also working through some issues, when you come to God and you're open, when you open your emotions before God and you just speak honestly, say, Lord, this is what's in my heart. This is how I feel towards my father or my mother. This is what's inside of me. Your word says to do this and that. I can't. I just don't have the strength within me to do that. I can't honor my parents. I simply can't. I want to obey your word, but I can't. And I think when the Lord sees that your heart is sincere and open, you're not just playing the charade where I'm not going to talk about it. I'm just going to avoid the whole honoring parents thing or anything else. But when we're open before God, saying, Lord, this is what's inside of me. When we open up, when we allow for the hatred, the pain, the brokenness inside of us to pour out before God, I'm sure that's where God sends his grace to start restoring us. The more we close it off, the more we go back to being a closed society. Don't speak about it. How dare you say that about your dad or about your mom? You're not honoring them. And the teenager or child doesn't know what to do with it. They go to church, they hear this, but they don't know how to process this. So I think being open before God. And one more thing, when Job, he was open before God. God didn't strike him down. God loves it when we're open before him. And I would say to the teenagers, to the kids that are, might be thinking, honor my father, that's the last thing I want to do. Be open before God. Be sincere. realize that God's word is not a mistake, but just be sincere, be open, and God will help you work through it.
Very small comment. The scariest thing, if you are going through something like this and you don't get restored inside, you don't honor your father, don't forgive him through God's grace, you will repeat your dad's or mom's mistakes in your life, in your relationship. Be very careful. Let God restore you so you can actually develop a good relationship.
Pastor Vlad, anything that you want to add? We're going to finish up.
10 seconds. The Bible says honor your father and mother. It doesn't say honor them when they're good. It doesn't say honor them when they treat you well. It just says honor them. Why? Because he's your dad. You don't get to choose your father. I don't get to choose mine. And we might say it's not fair. We all have a fair shot at the cross when we bow down and God says, I am your dad. You work with me. You have a fair shot. He has no favorites, okay? So we live in a broken world, but when we come to the cross, this is where everybody, each one of us, we have a fair chance, and God is fair and he's just. But we honor our parents because they're our parents, not because they're perfect and always right.
There's a verse kind of to finish this part up, and that's from Psalm. And also, we all know it, but a father to the fatherless. That's how God is described. He's a father to the fatherless, a defender of widows, is God in his holy dwelling. And I like this last part. God sets the lonely in families, meaning God notices those who are lonely. God notices those who are abused or those who maybe, don't have what other people have. He notices them, and not only does he notice them, he becomes a father to the fatherless. And so with that, I want to ask you maybe if we can thank our brothers that are here, and we're going to finish up with a prayer. Just want to say this before we pray. As a church, as a body, and if we can all stand up, we obviously understand that we are all broken people. Fathers, mothers, children, all of us are broken people. That being said, why we come together is because of the cross, like was already highlighted today. The cross and the Holy Spirit is what makes us better, is what changes us from the inside out. Whatever deficiencies we have in our own characters, whatever deficiencies we see in our own fatherhood, those of you who are fathers, for sons, whatever deficiencies you see in your fathers, doesn't matter. That is never an excuse to settle down. I would say even to those children, the kids that I've worked with that maybe do not have, a great father or don't have a father whatsoever, forgiveness and love and understanding that no matter how bad your dad is, or no matter how bad you see yourself as a father, at the end, it's kind of the same thing. When you're with Jesus, there's that picture, right, that classic parable about forgiving the one who was forgiven much, right? And he wasn't able to forgive that one who owed him just a little bit. In reality, when we talk about God and we talk about us being broken people, no matter how bad people are around you and how many things and excuses you can use and people you can blame for who, how you are, at the end of the day, all of those things don't compare to the void between us and God. The void of our sinful nature between us and God is way bigger than anything practical that we can point out in ourselves or in our families. And so the reality is we all have to have the right attitude towards our fathers. We have to have the right attitude towards ourselves when we fail, understanding that, God, that's why you're here. That's why you had to die on the cross, is because there's no other way to deal with it. Life isn't fair. I'm not perfect. I inherited problems. I create new problems for my kids, but even though all that's true, I have you who gives me grace, who teaches me, who corrects, who is a father to the fatherless, and all of that, and wisdom for me. I want to encourage everybody here, and something Pastor Vlad mentioned that I really, really, really want to highlight for our prayer. As a church, we're a family. We have to look out for each other.